designed and delivered for destiny. I'm your host, Nicole Cherie. I'm a wife, author, life coach, business owner, and speaker. I've been a mental health therapist for over 10 years, and now I want to bring the conversations from my office and bring it to you wherever you are. Each week, we will discuss various topics related to your design, your deliverance, or your destiny. I'm glad you're taking time to tune in out of your busy schedule. Let's jump on in. I'm so excited to be back for season 2. My prayer is always that each episode will enrich your life and your family. That something that is said blesses you or someone that you know. I know it's really only God's grace that I'm able to say the things that I share, and it's not because of me, but it is His Spirit that leads to the transformation that takes place in your life. So I'm so grateful that I can be useful as a vessel, and I trust that He's the one that brought you to this ministry. And with that being said, this season I will continue to talk about relevant topics that pertain to your design, deliverance, or destiny. I plan to maybe have guests join me this season, but to be honest, everything that I'm doing is by His leading, so let's see how that goes. Now, if you haven't listened to the previous episode on your life story, I encourage you to do so because it's connected to our topic for the day. Today, we are going to talk about embracing your transformation process. I love this topic because I'm such a big picture person, and I'm often seeking to understand how God is strategically putting together the pieces of not just an individual's life, but that of families and communities, nature, and especially His body of Christ. So stick around to the end because I'm going to share how to know which stage of your transformation process you are in. When you're pursuing your calling and, wanting to please God, it's common to get frustrated when things aren't moving forward the way that you had hoped. You may look at your life and wonder, have I wasted time? Am I aligned with what God has called me to do? Are there challenges in my life because of something I've done wrong? Here's the thing. I don't want you to allow yourself to get frustrated. Instead, get answers. Part of the journey of getting answers to those questions is having an awareness of the process that God is and has already taken you through. The last episode I discussed the power of your life story, and if you took some time to process your life story, you will actually recognize that you are where you are because of a process that you had to go through. It wasn't easy. It had its fair shares of good days and bad, but the victories that you've had and the struggles you've overcome, it required a process. It's always easier to look back in hindsight and celebrate what was. But embracing the process that we're in right now, that can feel more like a burden than something to celebrate. All too often, I think we kind of want to run or skip through the parts in our current process like that we typically aren't sitting around wanting to celebrate the issues we have in our personal lives or in our relationships, our profession. Our goal is not to understand why the obstacle is in front of us, but to move it out of the way so that we can accomplish the goal that we've set for that specific area of our life. Almost as if embracing our process, it can feel like giving in to our circumstances. And so I think we avoid doing that at all costs because for us, when we can actually envision our goals in our mind, we then believe we're ready for that goal like right now, no delay, right? Process me for what? And I just want you to know that you aren't wrong for wanting to remove those obstacles out of the way as quickly as possible and to run full steam ahead towards your goals. But it doesn't often work that way. There's generally something that comes up or issues that you're facing that impact your ability to move forward. And so this, my friend, is all part of your process. So what does that process look like? Well, it looks like dealing with challenging people, facing rejection or abandonment, being falsely accused, dealing with physical or mental health challenges, losing someone close to you, not having enough financial resources. It's a combination of many different things that we often will face in life. And if you can accept the next statement, you will find yourself embracing the good and the bad in your life and navigating through all of it with less frustration. You ready? Okay. So the process that God is taking you through is for your good. He's molding you to be like Him. He's perfecting you in Him. You know, it may not look that way, but He's thinking about your emotional, psychological, relational, physical, and spiritual needs. He's thinking about those parts in your subconscious that are affecting you and what it will take to transform those areas in you that you can't even see. He's factoring in who are all the people around you and how have they already or how will they influence you? What are their expectations of you? He knows the strongholds that have held you back and how you truly think even more than you do. So he's factoring in, how you'll respond to various situations that will arise. He's positioning you for long-term success. All too often, I've seen where, some of the most gifted and talented and chosen individuals struggle with so much frustration when they are delayed in life because they're moving forward based on the goals that they've set for their lives, and they overlook that there is a process God is taking them through, and unfortunately, He's not moved by our timelines and expectations. He knows that by taking us through His process, that He is addressing the many layers within you and around your life that will ensure that the goal that you're actually striving for is not only reached, but that you can maintain it and then continue to go forward from a place of peace, wholeness, and fulfillment. The gifts of God adds no sorrow. When He blesses you, it doesn't come with sorrow, but when we disregard His process and try to achieve things in our own strength and our own timeline, the sorrow that comes will be inevitable because we can't possibly see and prepare for everything that He is actually taking into account. So let's just talk a little bit about how to know that you're in process, right? What are some of the barriers to being processed and what are some things to consider? I'll start by saying that you're always in process, but you're not always benefiting from the process you're in. And that's not because of God, but because of you or those around you. So what are some of the things that prevents you from benefiting? I'm going to give you 3. Number 1, not recognizing that you're actually in process. Number 2, not being willing to yield to what God is doing in your life in that season. And number 3, allowing those around you to interfere with what God is doing in your life. So these are the 3 most common barriers to growth and transformation. It all starts with awareness. Imagine taking a class and not knowing why you're taking the class and what are the benefits. Now you might say, well, children do that all the time. Exactly, children, right? But even children who have an understanding of why they're taking certain classes, they excel more than those who don't. Awareness of what season you are in and that God is doing something in your life for your good is very important. And all it takes is for you to be curious and observant, to come off autopilot and start paying attention to the details. If you would simply commit to reflect on your life and what's happening around you, that alone will increase your awareness. Pray and talk to God. Ask for insight, wisdom, and understanding that your eyes will be open to see, that you will be more tuned and sensitive to what's happening around you. Number 2, resisting His process is very common. You didn't know that you're a low-key rebel. Yeah, the truth is that any area of our lives and ourselves that we have not fully surrendered to Him is an area that we are rebelling against God's process. God doesn't care about the fact that you've been a certain way for most of your life. He doesn't care, oh, this circumstance contributed to why this is happening. He cares about what needs to be transformed within you to become the vessel that He created you to be. All too often, Christians, we can become really good at being good people. We believe that we no longer need to be transformed by God, that overcoming the things of this world is really the main goal of being a Christian, but really that is just the beginning. Maybe just 10% of the transformation process. So if that's where your growth stopped, you still have 90% of the way to go. Now, what are some practical ways to know you're resisting His process? You might say things like, I know I need to do this, but, or you've been given instruction or wisdom on how to move forward, but you rationalize your way out of being obedient. You wait on convenience to be disciplined in that one area that you know it needs to change. You see that same pattern in your life that needs to be broken, but you're convinced that, so many other people have done it this way in the past and they were okay. And so therefore it's not really that big of a deal. Here's one I would say that probably very few people do, but you blame everything that's happening on Satan and take no personal responsibility for changing that situation. These are all signs that you're rebelling against God's process. And lastly, the third barrier is people. Oftentimes, people around you, they may have good intentions, but they may not have the spiritual sensitivity to hear God's voice and to recognize that you are in process. And so they unintentionally advise you to go against what God is saying to do. And often it's just they don't want to see you go through the struggle that is sometimes required for you to overcome a certain issue. People can enable you to even continue in the behaviors that He's trying to deliver you from. They just joke with you about the situation and why it's not a big deal. They may even engage with you in that behavior. Some people will, just kind of empathize with you when you're saying you're giving up instead of actually encouraging you to continue to press forward. So it's very important that you are aware of the spiritual sensitivity level of each person in your life. There are times where even those who are spiritually mature in your life, they may not have sought God's mind about a situation in your life. And so they're giving you advice based on what they believe is best and what they think God wants you to do. And so we really have to be wise about who we allow to speak into our life. And we have to be mindful of who is around us and how they are influencing us on a daily basis. If one of these barriers is something that you've struggled with and you would like more strategies to address them, let me know in the comments. And if at least 10 people comment, I'll provide a detailed resource that will assist you in overcoming these barriers. I really hope it's helpful for you to begin to just consider what to look out for so it doesn't prevent you from being delayed in your process and moving forward. Now, this next list consists of challenges that can arise when you're being processed. Being processed can mean being isolated, which, it can make you susceptible to feelings of loneliness. It can be very overwhelming. So naturally, you find ways to avoid whatever process is causing you to feel that way, which is why it's important for you to know how to navigate seasons of isolation instead of resisting it, because that's very important. When God wants to do certain things in your life, He needs for you to be isolated. Secondly, being processed, it can humble you, because it's not easy when you're being transformed. What you thought you knew, it just isn't enough anymore. Aspects of your personality is transformed. Your brain itself is rewired. You're changing mentally, physically, emotionally. It can get to the point where you even feel childlike because you realize you can't accomplish what is in front of you in your own strength like you used to. You realize that you don't fit in with people the same way that you used to. So you can begin to feel awkward at times, but just ask anyone who has been processed in some way Eventually you adjust and it becomes your new normal. So allow yourself to be humbled. That is a key sign that God has his hand on you. I don't want to belabor this point, but it's so important to remember that all of the obstacles that you've faced and or continue to face is for your benefit. God chastises those he loves. Why? Out of love. He will allow you to be surrounded by stubborn people because you have an issue with control. And for him to remove that from you, it will require you to repeatedly see that you will not get results by taking things into your own hands and getting people to do things the way that you want them to do it when you want them to do it. That issue with your supervisor or colleague is because he knows you tend to keep it moving when people have character issues, and so he'll put you in a situation where you're forced to mature and deal with immature people instead of running away. He will leave you in that situation as a test to see, are you going to trust him that he will either fix that situation or that he'll bring you out in due season? Or are you just going to take it into your own hands? All of these obstacles are a sign that you have been or continue to be processed. What's interesting is that certain processing requires you to be in a certain season for that processing to begin. He's not going to take a child through the same process as he would an adult. And he always considers what you can handle. It's also interesting that there really is no time frame on how long your process should take. Ultimately, that is up to you. Oftentimes, God is ready for you to move on from the process that you're in. But because we're resisting, avoiding, and refusing to change, we continue to go through that same situation over and over again. And, he's sitting and watching us continue to struggle in that area because the reality is, based on his plan and purpose that he has for you, you absolutely have to pass that test before you move on to the next phase, right? He's not going to let you skip a step. That's part of how he loves you. So I want you to just take a second and ask yourself, are you delayed in your process because you've resisted to change and grow and you continue to make excuses? Your next level is tied to your ability to fulfill the purpose for God in your life in this season, which includes being processed. You likely haven't finished that project that you've been working on because there is a blessing attached to it that you're not quite ready for. But moving forward, I trust and believe that you will not miss any good or perfect thing that God has for you and has for your life because you will be aligned with what God is doing in and through you in each season. Now let's talk about other people's process for a second. As you go on your journey, keep in mind that the areas where we need to be processed, it's going to be different for each person. It's not always obvious. Though it may seem obvious where, the people in your life where they actually need to grow, I recommend just encouraging others throughout their journey, but never take responsibility for another person's process. Unless you're raising a young child, and even then, God is ultimately the one that is in control. It's really best if you focus on what God is doing in your life in that season, because we can't always know what specifically God is wanting to change and transform in that person's life. So we could see a list of flaws and issues, but that may not be as important to God. There may be something else that he's working on because of something specific that he knows that thing is more of a priority. So we don't want to get in God's way by trying to change people and address things that is not necessarily as important to him. Another thing to keep in mind as we are going through our own process and watching others go through theirs is God does not change everything about us at one time. He's very gracious, he's long-suffering, which means very patient. He's not really in a rush like we are. We're the ones that we don't like inconvenience, we don't want stress or problems. So whatever it needs to be done, Lord, do it now. It's funny because we actually convince ourselves that our patience will arrive once that problem is solved. Like our attitude, it's going to improve as soon as that person changes, as soon as the situation goes away. And then we tell ourselves that because those around us are not changing, that is what's holding us back from our transformation process. It's interesting, right? That we make our change contingent upon what's happening in other people's lives. There's so many layers of rebellion and deception that's connected to that. But we won't talk about that so much today. I just really want to encourage you to let's take our hands off of other people and let's just be supportive and compassionate as they go through our process, and do the same with yourself. Show yourself compassion and be supportive and encouraging towards yourself as you are going through this journey that you are on. Let me just pause here and say, listen, I know that I give you guys a lot of information, and really each episode contains 3 to 4 topics that could be its own episode. That's just how I'm wired, y'all. I gotta give it to you in a way that you can see the big picture, but then also some of the main details as well. But for those of you that want to spend more time on any one of these topics, let me know, and I'm here to help in any way that I can. But please be sure to subscribe and share this with others who you know would benefit. Okay, so another trap to avoid is comparison. Since everyone's process looks different, don't compare your process to others. It's easy to look at other people's lives and feel like theirs is so much easier, or they're not having to go through the same challenges that you've had to face. The truth is, their challenges may be ahead of them, or maybe they just haven't shared them with you yet. Trust me when I say there's always more happening in the lives of those around you than you realize. More importantly, where God has taken them, it may not require for them to have to overcome the same things that you've had to overcome. For instance, let's say someone is called to care for God's creation by taking care of nature, right? They won't benefit from having to overcome challenges where they have to deal with difficult people, right? They may have to go through challenges where they have to face life-threatening situations and overcome those by faith and trusting God. On the other hand, you may be surrounded by controlling and prideful people. Why is that? Well, it's certainly not because God intends for you to say, man, forget people and just go spend your time hanging out with animals. It could be because you're called to have compassion for those who are maybe in leadership. And often those in leadership struggle with a lot of, can you guess? Yeah, control and pride. So we have to think of it from that perspective instead of comparing ourselves. David was a rejected shepherd boy who killed beasts with his bare hands before he was anointed to be king and would face Goliath. Why? Why did he have to grow up in those circumstances? Well, that was part of his preparation process. So let's quickly talk about the stages of being processed. There are 3 main stages with a test in between each stage. There's the preparation stage, then you're tested. Next is the transformation stage, then you're tested, and then you graduate, or you have to keep repeating that test over and over again. Now, a lot of times we really don't have a say in the preparation stage. Life is just going to happen. Your role during this stage is to take away the right lessons so you're prepared for the test. If you don't recognize that there are lessons to learn, then you remain in that same course and you're delayed and you're not able to then move on to the next stage, okay? But once you do glean from those experiences the lessons that you're supposed to get, then you're tested. And as you pass that test, you then move on to the transformation stage. Now, this is where most people resist and remain in unhealthy cycles for years because the transformation stage is always internal. Your knowledge and understanding that comes from the previous stage, it's really just the foundation for your transformation. But you still have to literally change as a person. And, that requires a different set of circumstances because we know it takes a lot for people to change. I've touched on this already, but the key ultimately here is to surrender and allow God to transform those parts of you that you have refused to give to Him. Now, once you've passed the transformation test, which, by the way, is much harder than the test that you take during the preparation stage, but once you do, you are then able to move on and receive the blessing that is attached to that transformation that you just went through. So for example, instead of functioning on the ground like a caterpillar, you will now have access to a new dimension like a butterfly, because you can now fly and see things in new ways. You're now elevated. This is the next and final stage called graduation. When you begin to operate on a higher level in healthier ways, you begin to reap the fruits of that new level that you're on. And this is a great and amazing place to be. So congrats when you've made it this far. Now, I want to just tell you this next part, because I think that oftentimes people talk about transformation, but they neglect to say this one piece. And here it is. Don't get discouraged when God wants to elevate you again. And so you've been a butterfly, you're excelling, you're thriving, but now he wants to shift you from being a butterfly to something else. So you have to start that preparation process all over again. There's new levels of tests that you're going to have to pass. And so just keep that in mind, because it's all about you being transformed to be in a position to be useful in his hands. And depending on what that looks like, depending on your specific calling and purpose, will determine how many stages of transformation you're going to have to go through. But also, we're always going to be transformed in some way until we return to him. All right, now, one of the blessings of knowing and embracing God's process in your life is that you can see tangible areas of growth within yourself and within your life. You get a deeper understanding of why certain seasons that you went through were necessary, how God used that experience you had for your good when Satan really just wanted to destroy you. As you allow yourself to be processed, you become a weapon in God's hands. And I want to mention that even though you've been Christian for 10 or 15 or 40 years, it doesn't mean you've become a weapon in God's hands. And listen, if you heard that and any kind of pride kicked in, I want you to write that down, because pride is an area that still needs to be processed. At the end of the day, we are all being processed in some way, being molded, and it can be exhausting. I had a habit of complaining to God because I felt like every time I go through one process, here comes the next. It felt like a lot at times, but the fruit, the victories, the progress that came, it far exceeded the pain. God is so gracious and merciful, gentle, and so patient. But being molded requires fire. Why? Because fire purifies. You're never too young. You're never too old to be processed. That storm that you just left, or the one that you're entering, it's all part of the process. What came out of it? What about you has grown? What lessons have you learned? What shifted in your mindset? I hope it's something, because if not, that storm is going to come again. But once you've grown past those things, when that storm comes again, you won't be affected the same way. Certain temptations won't affect you the same. Certain people, the way they talk to you, the rejection, the comparisons, the anger, the mistakes, whatever those things are, it's not going to affect you the same. Just to come full circle, this is another reason why it's important to know your life story, because it's a detailed picture of how God's hand has been on your life and the various processes that he has already taken you through. God is perfecting you because you matter to him. He loves you enough to care about every aspect of who you are. So let's stop resisting him. He knows the desires of your heart, but he cares more about your character and the condition of your soul than he does your life goals. Know that if you surrender and yield to his process, the desires of your heart will follow. Just take a minute and think about one or two ways that you can surrender to what God has been trying to shift in your life. Not something that you just want to change, but something that he's been trying to change in you, but you've ignored his voice. And it's very important that it comes from him, because he's going to give you the grace to make those changes. If you try to do it in your own strength, it won't work. What is it that he's trying to shift in you in this season? All right, you know what time it is. This is the time where we get to discuss a phrase, pattern, or belief that has been a hindrance to many in the culture. And if we eradicate it, it will improve your life, family, and the community. It's chain breaking time. The phrase for this week is, people have been doing it for years and they survive. Lord, help me. Where do I start? The challenge with this one is that people use this line when they are determined to continue to do whatever it is that they've made up their mind to do. It's said as a way of kind of ending the conversation and avoiding any kind of accountability. Why? Because there are groups of people from the past who will defend them and give them permission to continue that unhealthy behavior. Listen, I love people from the past. The older generations, they got a lot of things right. However, not everything that was done was healthy and wise. Did they live for many years? Yes, a lot of them did. But what was their quality of life is the question we have to ask. Were they thriving or were they in survival mode? All that matters, because using them as your justification is saying that you want the same results. Please, everyone, let's stop using this phrase to justify unhealthy eating and behaviors and ways of thinking. They did the best that they could with what they had to work with. But we grow when we know. They didn't know, now we do. So let's move forward and not remain in the past. Let me close with a final word of encouragement. You will finish the race set before you. Just trust the process. Lean not on your own understanding, and God will see you through to the end. Your calling is too great to be delayed. Your purpose and your family is too important for you to not be transformed. You don't have to do anything in your own strength. Just continuously give God your yes, I surrender, and He will take it from there. You are being processed because you are loved. Until next time, shalom.